In an era where beauty was more about elegance and charm than flashy appearances, Evelyn Nesbit became a sensation. She was the face that launched countless works of art, inspiring photographers and painters alike. But behind her captivating smile lay a story of obsession, betrayal, and one of the most shocking murders in American history. At just 16, she found herself entangled with powerful men who adored her beauty but ultimately led her into a scandal that shook the nation. From her rise as the iconic Gibson Girl to the dark events that unfolded at Madison Square Garden, Evelyn's life was as mesmerizing as it was tragic. Join me as we uncover the beauty, obsession, and murder that forever marked Evelyn Nesbit's name in history. But to understand the context, let's look at her journey from the very beginning. Early beginnings in uncertain times. Evelyn Nesbit was born on Christmas Day in either 1884 or 1885 in Natrona, Pennsylvania, a small town near Pittsburgh. Her exact birth year is unclear because the records were destroyed in a fire, and Evelyn herself was unsure of the date. Interestingly, her mother would sometimes add years to Evelyn's age to get around child labor laws. Evelyn's family life started out comfortably. Her father, Winfield Scott Nesbit, was a lawyer, and her mother, Evelyn Florence, stayed home to care for the family. Evelyn, of Scots-Irish heritage, was particularly close to her father. She wanted to make him proud and often impressed him with her curiosity and accomplishments. He encouraged her love for books, even creating a small library for her filled with fairy tales, fantasies, and adventure stories often meant for boys. Evelyn also showed an interest in music and dance, and her father made sure she had lessons to nurture her talents. But life took a devastating turn when Evelyn was about 10 years old. Her father passed away suddenly at the age of 40, leaving the family without any money. They lost their home, and their belongings were sold to pay off debts. Evelyn's mother, who had some skills in dressmaking, struggled to find steady work. The family moved from one boarding house to another, relying on the kindness of friends and relatives. Sometimes Evelyn's younger brother, Howard, had to live with other families because they couldn't afford to stay together. Things seemed to improve slightly when Evelyn's mother was given money to rent a house and turn it into a boarding house. However, she lacked the skills to run the business successfully, and the plan failed. With no other options, the Nesbits moved to Philadelphia in 1898, hoping for a fresh start. Evelyn's mother found a job as a clerk at Wanamaker's, which was a large department store. She sent for Evelyn and Howard, who joined her there and started working as well. At just 14 years old, Evelyn worked 12-hour days, 6 days a week. It was during her time at Wanamaker's that Evelyn's life began to change. One day, an artist saw her and was struck by her beauty. This artist, a woman, asked Evelyn to pose for a portrait. Her mother, always cautious, agreed after making sure it was safe. Evelyn sat for 5 hours and earned $1, which would be about $31 today. Little did she know that this single portrait would open new doors. Evelyn quickly became a favorite model for artists in Philadelphia. Painters, illustrators, and even stained glass artisans admired her striking features and graceful presence. She loved the work and soon realized that posing as a model paid far more than her job at Wanamaker's. In her own words, Evelyn later said, "When I saw I could earn more money posing as an artist's model than I could at Wanamaker's, I gave my mother no peace until she permitted me to pose for a livelihood." Modeling became her escape from the hard labor of department store work, and it also provided much-needed financial support for her family. Evelyn's natural beauty and charm made her stand out, and her reputation as a model grew quickly. For the first time since her father's death, the Nesbit family began to see a glimmer of hope. But as Evelyn stepped further into the spotlight, her life would soon become much more complicated, taking her far from the modest boarding houses of her past. A new start in New York City. In the summer of 1900, Evelyn Nesbit's mother decided it was time for a change. Struggling to provide for her children after years of hardship, she left Evelyn and her brother Howard in the care of others and moved to New York City. Her goal was to find work as a seamstress or clothing designer, but the competition in the bustling city was fierce. By November, without a steady income or a clear plan, she sent for her children. The family reunited, but they could only afford to live in a cramped single room on 22nd Street in Manhattan. Desperate to improve their situation, Evelyn's mother turned to the few connections they had: Artists in Philadelphia had written letters of introduction for Evelyn, and Mrs. Nesbit approached James Carroll Beckwith, a prominent New York painter. Beckwith was not just a talented artist, but also a well-connected figure in the art world. He saw potential in Evelyn's unique beauty and introduced her to other respected artists such as Frederick S. Church and Carla J. Blenner. These connections marked the start of Evelyn's modeling career. Her delicate features and graceful demeanor quickly caught the attention of New York's art community. However, Mrs. Nesbit, now managing her daughter's career, struggled to navigate this new world. She claimed in later interviews, "I never allowed Evelyn to pose in the altogether," meaning nude. Yet some artworks from the period suggest otherwise, depicting Evelyn in revealing poses. Despite these controversies, Evelyn's career flourished. She became one of the most sought-after models of the time. Photographers like Otto Cerrone and Rudolf Eichemeyer captured her likeness, while Charles Dana Gibson, creator of the iconic Gibson Girl, used Evelyn as the inspiration for one of his most famous works, Woman, the Eternal Question. In this piece, her profile is framed by her cascading hair, which forms the shape of a question mark. Evelyn's face soon became a staple of the era's visual culture. She graced the covers of popular women's magazines like Vanity Fair, Harper's Bazaar, and Cosmopolitan. Her image was featured in advertisements for various products, calendars, and even promotional items like pocket mirrors, beer trays, and postcards. These postcards, often called mignons for their sweet and charming quality, presented Evelyn in a sensual but tasteful way, avoiding the vulgarity associated with French postcards of the time. This rise in fame coincided with a major shift in advertising. The use of real-life models in photography was replacing illustrations, and Evelyn was at the forefront of this trend. She began working with Joel Feder, a pioneer in fashion photography. Unlike the lengthy sessions required for artists' models, photo shoots were quicker and less physically demanding. Evelyn found the work easier and far more rewarding financially. She earned $5 for a half-day session and $10 for a full day, which is equivalent to about $300 today. With her modeling income, Evelyn was earning far more than she or her family had ever made working at Wanamaker's department store. But the cost of living in New York City was high, and the family continued to struggle. Evelyn's success brought some stability, but it wasn't enough to erase their financial worries entirely. Her journey to becoming a Broadway star. As Evelyn's modeling career reached new heights, she began to grow restless. Long hours of posing in still confined settings took their toll. She wanted something more dynamic, and her growing fame attracted the attention of theater producers. Some were legitimate, while others were not. But Evelyn saw an opportunity for a fresh start. She pressed her mother to let her enter the world of theater. Although reluctant at first, Mrs. Nesbit eventually agreed, swayed by stories of chorus girls marrying wealthy men. And so Evelyn's first role came in the hit Broadway production, Florodora. In July 1901, she joined the chorus line dressed as a Spanish maiden. Her presence was captivating, but she disliked being called Flossie the Fuss by her castmates. To establish her identity, she adopted the stage name Evelyn Nesbit. After her time in Florodora, Evelyn landed a role in The Wild Rose. The show's producer, George Lederer, immediately recognized her potential. He not only offered her a contract, but also elevated her from the chorus line to a featured role. As the gypsy girl Vashti, Evelyn captivated audiences. Her beauty and charm became the talk of the town, earning her mentions in gossip columns and theatrical magazines. The New York Herald celebrated her rise with a two-page article titled, "Her Winsome Face to be Seen Only from 8 to 11 p.m." The piece detailed her journey from an unknown model to a star of the stage. Evelyn's physical beauty and stage presence were praised endlessly, though her acting abilities were rarely mentioned. Her fame continued to grow, and she took on more roles, including Miss Always There in the musical Tommy Rot. Audiences adored her, and she became a fixture in New York's entertainment scene. But as Evelyn's career soared, so did the challenges that came with her newfound fame. She had no idea that her life was about to take a dramatic and dangerous turn, thrusting her into the center of one of the most shocking scandals of the century. Evelyn Nesbit was just 15 or 16 years old when she met Stanford White in 1901. At the time, she was working as a chorus girl on Broadway in the popular play Florodora. White, a famous architect and socialite, was 46. He was married with a son, but he lived a life full of secrets and luxury. Evelyn later said she was struck by his large, intimidating presence and how old he seemed to her. White invited Evelyn and her friend Edna Goodrich to his luxurious apartment on West 24th Street. The place was breathtaking. From the moment Evelyn stepped in, she was overwhelmed by the grand furnishings and lavish decor. Even the lunch he served matched the luxury of the surroundings. Evelyn and her friend were amazed. After lunch, White took them to an upstairs room with a giant red velvet swing. He encouraged Evelyn to sit on it while he pushed her, turning the moment into a playful, spontaneous game. Despite their age difference, White had a charm that drew people in. He was witty, generous, and full of life. Newspapers described him as masterful and boyish, even though he was middle-aged. Evelyn's mother, Mrs. Nesbit, also found White to be a kind and helpful man. He made an impression on her, offering to move the family into a suite at the Wellington Hotel and even paying for Evelyn's brother Howard to attend a military academy. He seemed like a caring figure who wanted the best for the Nesbit family, but they had no idea how dangerous this relationship would be. A dangerous relationship. White's generosity didn't stop with gifts and housing. He convinced Evelyn's mother to take a trip back to Pittsburgh to visit friends, promising he would look after Evelyn while she was away. But what seemed like a kind gesture would turn into something much darker. Evelyn later recalled an evening at White's apartment that started with dinner and champagne. Afterward, he gave her a tour of the apartment, which ended in a small room called the Mirror Room. It was furnished with just a green velvet sofa. White then gave her a yellow satin kimono to change into, and she did as he asked. Evelyn said her memory of the evening ended there. The next thing she remembered was waking up in the bed, naked next to White. She noticed blood on the sheets and realized she had lost her virginity. This traumatic event left a deep scar, but Evelyn continued her relationship with White for some time. He became both her lover and a close companion. As the relationship went on, Evelyn discovered she wasn't the only young girl he had been involved with. White kept a little black book with the names of other underage girls he had seduced, which left Evelyn feeling betrayed and hurt. This relationship was the beginning of Evelyn's entanglement in a world of wealth, power, and dark secrets that would ultimately lead to betrayal and tragedy. John Barrymore, a young charismatic artist, became enchanted by Evelyn Nesbit after watching her perform in The Wild Rose. He attended the show repeatedly, drawn not only by her beauty but also by her captivating stage presence. They met at a party hosted by Stanford White, who introduced Barrymore as the brother of his friend, actress Ethel Barrymore. In 1902, the pair began a romance that was lighthearted and fun, with Barrymore's humor and charm quickly winning Evelyn's heart. Barrymore, then 21 and close to Evelyn's age, was pursuing a career as an illustrator and cartoonist. Though talented, his career had not yet taken off, and his income was modest. Despite this, Evelyn found herself drawn to his carefree spirit. They often spent long evenings together, staying at Barrymore's apartment until the early hours of the morning. Evelyn enjoyed his company, but their relationship faced strong opposition from her mother and Stanford White. Both White and Mrs. Nesbit saw Barrymore as unsuitable for Evelyn. His limited income and irresponsible financial habits raised concerns. To keep them apart, White arranged for Evelyn to enroll in a boarding school in New Jersey. Barrymore even proposed marriage in front of White and Mrs. Nesbit, but Evelyn turned him down. Years later, in 1939, Evelyn and Barrymore crossed paths again in Chicago. Barrymore was starring in a play, and after a performance, he visited a club where Evelyn was appearing on stage. According to legend, Barrymore declared to the room that Evelyn had been his first love, leaving both of them in tears during their reunion. While Evelyn's romance with Barrymore faded, other wealthy admirers began vying for her attention. One of the most persistent was Harry Kendall Thaw, a young millionaire from Pittsburgh. Thaw, who was an heir to a vast railroad fortune, had a long history of erratic behavior and mental instability. His reckless and self-indulgent lifestyle matched his obsession with Evelyn. Thaw had attended dozens of performances of The Wild Rose over nearly a year, watching Evelyn from a distance. Even before meeting her, he harbored a deep resentment toward Stanford White. Thaw believed White had blocked his acceptance into elite New York social circles and viewed him as a predator who preyed on young women. This animosity may have fueled Thaw's fixation on Evelyn, as she was closely tied to White. Thaw arranged their first meeting through an intermediary, introducing himself under the alias Mr. Monroe. He showered Evelyn with gifts and money while maintaining this false identity. One day, he revealed the truth, dramatically declaring, "I am not Monroe, I am Harry Kendall Thaw of Pittsburgh." Evelyn, used to attention from wealthy men, did not react with the surprise Thaw had expected. Though Thaw's persistence eventually caught Evelyn's attention, his erratic behavior and obsession with White set the stage for a dangerous and volatile relationship. A European escape that took a dark turn. In early 1903, Evelyn Nesbit was recovering from surgery while at boarding school. The official story was that she had suffered from acute appendicitis, but rumors swirled that she might have been pregnant, possibly by John Barrymore, and had an abortion. Evelyn and Barrymore both denied these claims under oath years later. Harry Kendall Thaw, who was still deeply infatuated with Evelyn, stepped in during her recovery. He made sure she received top-notch medical care and suggested a European trip to help her heal. He convinced both Evelyn and her mother that this would be good for her. Mrs. Nesbit agreed and joined them for propriety. The trip, however, was far from relaxing. Thaw packed the itinerary with constant travel, creating tension between Evelyn and her mother. Eventually, Mrs. Nesbit returned to the United States, leaving Evelyn alone with Thaw in Paris. It was during this time that Thaw repeatedly proposed marriage to Evelyn. She refused, knowing he was obsessed with purity and would react badly if he learned about her past with Stanford White. Under pressure, Evelyn finally confessed White's assault. Thaw's reaction was explosive. He accused Evelyn's mother of being an unfit parent and began dragging her to places connected to female martyrdom, such as the birthplace of Joan of Arc. At one point, he even wrote in a guest book, "She would not have been a virgin if Stanford White had been around." Things took a horrifying turn in Austria-Hungary, where Thaw took Evelyn to a castle. He isolated her in a separate part of the building, locking her in a room. Over the course of 2 weeks, Thaw beat her with a whip and sexually assaulted her. When it was over, he acted as if nothing had happened, apologizing and even appearing cheerful. Evelyn was left traumatized. When Evelyn returned to New York, she began confiding in friends about the ordeal she had endured. To her shock, others had similar stories about Thaw's erratic behavior. He was known for his addictive tendencies, including taking morphine, and many considered him mentally unstable. Evelyn learned from other men that Thaw was crazy and prone to extreme behavior. Despite this, Thaw continued to pursue her relentlessly, promising that marriage would bring stability to his life. Evelyn, however, was in a difficult position. Her reputation had already been tarnished by her connection to Stanford White. If the full story of her relationship with him became public, she feared no respectable man would ever marry her. She was also growing resentful of White. She blamed him for not warning her about Thaw's darker side. At the same time, Evelyn felt trapped. Her mother had remarried, leaving her estranged and without proper support. Desperate to escape the cycle of poverty and uncertainty, Evelyn began to consider Thaw's proposal more seriously. Marriage to Harry Kendall Thaw. Thaw promised Evelyn a better life, swearing that after their marriage he would live like a Benedictine monk and be a devoted husband. He even claimed he had forgiven her for her relationship with Stanford White, though he viewed himself as a savior of her purity. And so Evelyn finally agreed to marry Thaw. His mother approved of the marriage, but insisted that Evelyn abandon her career in theater and modeling. She also demanded that Evelyn never speak of her past life again. On April 4th, 1905, Evelyn and Thaw were married. For her wedding, Thaw chose an unusual black traveling suit with brown trim. Newspapers celebrated her new title as Mistress of Millions. After the wedding, Evelyn moved into Lyndhurst, the Thaw family's grand estate in Pittsburgh. It should have been a dream come true, but it felt more like a cage. Isolated with Thaw's mother and her strict Presbyterian friends, Evelyn found herself surrounded by material wealth but no joy. In later years, she described their shallow values, saying they focused only on appearances and things that didn't matter. Evelyn had imagined a life filled with travel and entertainment, but instead, Thaw became consumed with a campaign against Stanford White. He started writing letters to Anthony Comstock, a well-known crusader against vice, claiming to expose White's immoral behavior. Thaw even believed White had hired gang members to stalk him, though there was no evidence this was true. White, for his part, didn't take Thaw seriously. He saw him as nothing more than a clown, nicknaming him the Pennsylvania Pug because of his baby-faced appearance. And as a result of all these circumstances, Evelyn's marriage to Thaw was far from the escape she had hoped for. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, filled with tension, control, and unresolved pain from the past. The night that changed everything. In June 1906, Evelyn Nesbit and Harry Kendall Thaw visited New York City before embarking on a European vacation. That evening, Thaw announced he had tickets to see the premiere of Mam'zelle Champagne at Madison Square Garden's rooftop theater. Before the show, they stopped for dinner at Café Martin. To their surprise, Stanford White was also there, and so Thaw's mood shifted. Despite the summer heat, he kept his long black overcoat on, refusing to take it off, even though he was dressed in a tuxedo underneath. At the theater, the performance was nearing its finale. White, as was his habit, arrived late and sat at a table reserved just for him. Thaw spotted him and approached several times, but hesitated, retreating each time. Finally, as the closing number, "I Could Love a Million Girls," filled the air, Thaw acted. From just 2 feet away, he pulled a pistol and shot White 3 times in the head and back. As a result, White died instantly. Thaw addressed the stunned crowd, though accounts of what he said varied. Some heard, "I did it because he ruined my wife." Others recalled, "You ruined my life," or "You'll never go out with that woman again." At first, the audience thought it was part of the performance. When they realized White was dead, panic set in. Thaw brandished the pistol as police arrived to take him into custody. Evelyn, who was caught in the chaos, managed to slip away and sought refuge at a friend's apartment. Reflecting on that night, she later said, "A complete numbness of mind and body took possession of me. I moved like a person in a trance for hours afterward. And by the next morning, news of the murder dominated every headline. The media frenzy was relentless, with reporters digging into every detail, no matter how minor or peripheral. Facts were scarce, but sensational stories were plentiful, feeding the public's hunger for drama. This was the height of yellow journalism, and the murder of Stanford White became the biggest scandal of its time. 1 week after the shooting, filmmaker Thomas Edison rushed to release a short film titled Rooftop Murder, cashing in on the public's curiosity. Speaking of which, female reporters dubbed Sob Sisters, or the Pity Patrol, covered the case with dramatic flair, focusing on human interest angles. While some journalists sympathized with Thaw, others criticized Evelyn harshly. Nixola Greeley-Smith wrote, "She was sold to one man, White, and later sold herself to another Thaw." Evelyn's testimony during the trial drew particular attention. Greeley-Smith called it the vivisection of a woman's soul, describing how Evelyn was forced to recount every detail of her relationship with White in front of hundreds of spectators. Many accounts painted her as both a victim and a figure of scandal, while her mother faced criticism for allegedly sacrificing her daughter's innocence for financial gain. And did you know that the press's relentless coverage even drew criticism from President Theodore Roosevelt? He denounced the newspapers for publishing disgusting particulars about the trial and considered censoring such content. Church groups also lobbied for restrictions on the media, though no action was taken. The media didn't stop at dissecting the lives of Thaw and Evelyn. They also scrutinized Stanford White, both as a man and as an architect. Once admired for his work, White was now remembered more for his scandals than his achievements. The Evening Standard dismissed him as more of an artist than architect, claiming his designs reflected his social dissolution. Others defended White's reputation. Richard Harding Davis, a journalist and close friend of White, was outraged by the way the press twisted the truth. Vanity Fair published a harsh editorial about White, prompting Davis to write a rebuttal in Collier's magazine. He described White as someone who admired a beautiful woman as he admired every other beautiful thing God has given us, and his delight over one was as keen, as boyish, as grateful over any others. The murder of Stanford White and the ensuing trial exposed the dark underbelly of high society during the Gilded Age. For Evelyn, it was the moment her life became a public spectacle, forever entangled with one of the most infamous scandals in American history. This infamous act not only sealed Stanford White's tragic fate, but also set the stage for one of the most sensational courtroom dramas of the era. The trial of Harry Kendall Thaw. The trial of Harry Kendall Thaw after the murder of Stanford White captivated the nation. Known as the trial of the century, it became a battle not just over guilt but also over Thaw's state of mind. His mother, determined to protect him from the stigma of clinical insanity, pushed for a strategy that framed his actions as a momentary lapse, a brainstorm, as it was called back then. This approach was meant to show that Thaw's violent act was a one-time outburst, not the behavior of someone truly insane. Mrs. Thaw was acutely aware of her family's history of hereditary mental illness and how it could be exposed during the trial. To shield her son, she hired top-tier doctors, spending an estimated $500,000, which was quite an astronomical sum at the time, to support the defense. Evelyn Nesbit later remarked on the family's relentless efforts, saying, "The Thaws will put the biggest lunacy experts that money can buy on the stand. Harry was a madman, but they will prove it nicely." Evelyn played a crucial role in this defense, though her involvement came with conditions. It was rumored that the Thaw family promised her a significant amount of money, anywhere from $25,000 to $1 million, for favorable testimony. But there was a catch. If the trial ended poorly for Thaw, Evelyn would receive nothing. This placed immense pressure on her as her financial future depended on supporting a man who had caused her so much pain. At the same time, Evelyn's mother was noticeably absent from the proceedings. She aligned herself with the prosecution, as Thaw's lawyers accused her of essentially selling Evelyn to Stanford White. This betrayal further isolated Evelyn, who was also blamed by her brother Howard. Howard, who had seen White as a father figure, directed his grief and anger at Evelyn, leaving her with little family support during the trial. Thaw's trial became a media spectacle, with every detail splashed across the front pages of newspapers. Evelyn, as the star witness, faced grueling testimony. In open court, she had to recount her relationship with Stanford White, including the night he allegedly abused her. This was the first time Evelyn made the accusation publicly, adding even more drama to the already sensational case. The first trial began in January 1907. The courtroom was packed with reporters, artists, and curious spectators. The jurors, for the first time in American history, were sequestered to keep them from being influenced by the relentless media coverage. After months of testimony and arguments, the jury deliberated for 47 hours but couldn't reach a decision. 7 jurors voted guilty and 5 voted not guilty. Thaw was furious, believing the jury failed to recognize his act as one of honor, a man defending the virtue of his wife. The second trial started in early 1908. Once again, Thaw's defense focused on temporary insanity. This time the jury sided with him, finding him not guilty on the grounds of insanity at the time of the murder. And so instead of going to prison, Thaw was sent to the Matewan State Hospital for the criminally insane in New York. Thaw's wealth allowed him to live comfortably at Matewan. Unlike the average patient, he had access to better accommodations and privileges. But Thaw wasn't content to stay confined. He immediately hired a legal team to argue that he was now sane, launching a lengthy battle to regain his freedom. In 1913, frustrated by the slow process, Thaw escaped from the hospital and fled to Canada. But his freedom didn't last long. He was caught and extradited back to the U.S. However, his persistence paid off. In 1915, after years of legal maneuvering, Thaw was declared sane and released from custody. The trials of Harry Kendall Thaw were not just about his guilt or innocence. They were a window into the dark intersections of wealth, power, scandal, and the fragile justice system of the era. In 1910, Evelyn Nesbit gave birth to a son, Russell William Thaw, in Berlin, Germany. She always claimed that Harry Kendall Thaw was Russell's father, saying he was conceived during a conjugal visit while Thaw was confined at Matewan. However, Thaw denied being Russell's father for the rest of his life. By 1911, Evelyn reconciled with her mother, who stepped in to help raise Russell. This allowed Evelyn to focus on finding work to support herself and her son. Speaking of which, did you know that Russell even appeared with his mother in several silent films, including Threads of Destiny, 1914, and Redemption, 1917? These roles showcased Evelyn's attempt to reinvent herself in the growing film industry. As Russell grew older, he carved out his own path. He became a skilled pilot, competing in the 1935 Bendix Trophy race from Los Angeles to Cleveland. He placed third, ahead of the legendary Amelia Earhart, who came in fifth. Despite his mother's turbulent past, Russell's accomplishments highlighted his resilience and determination to build a life of his own, reinventing herself in difficult times. After the trials, Evelyn's connection with the Thaw family fell apart. While they had provided her with some financial support during the court proceedings, the payments were inconsistent and small. Once the second trial ended, the Thaws cut off all funding. Evelyn's grandson, Russell Thaw Jr., later shared a story that she received $25,000 from the Thaws after the trials, but donated it to anarchist Emma Goldman, who passed it on to political activist John Reed. If true, it was a bold move to spite the family that had abandoned her. With no help from the Thaws, Evelyn had to rely on herself. She found work in vaudeville and silent films, appearing in productions like Threads of Destiny in 1914. While her film career brought some success, Evelyn continued to face challenges. In 1915, she divorced Thaw, officially ending their troubled relationship. Evelyn's second marriage to her dance partner Jack Clifford initially seemed promising. The pair had performed a successful stage act starting in 1913, packing venues like Chicago's Auditorium Theater and drawing thousands of fans. Their marriage in 1916 made headlines, but Clifford struggled with Evelyn's infamous reputation. Being known as Mr. Evelyn Nesbit became too much for him. He left her in 1918, and after years of legal battles, their divorce was finalized in 1933. Despite her struggles, Evelyn found ways to keep moving forward. In the 1920s, her longtime friend and nightclub owner Dan Blanco helped her make a cabaret comeback. She performed at Chicago's Moulin Rouge and later at Blanco's Club Alabama, regaining some of her former spotlight. Evelyn also briefly opened a tea room in Manhattan called the Evelyn Nesbit Specialty Food Shop in 1921. Some say it may have doubled as a speakeasy during Prohibition, adding an air of mystery to her ventures. Through all the ups and downs, Evelyn Nesbit continued to reinvent herself, showing resilience in the face of challenges that would have broken most. After her vaudeville years, Evelyn Nesbit began performing in clubs and cabarets across the country. Her name was lent to several establishments, including the Evelyn Nesbit Club in Atlantic City and Chez Evelyn in Manhattan. One of her favorite places to perform was Club Alabama in Chicago, where she often found a warm audience. But behind the spotlight, Evelyn faced personal struggles. She battled chronic financial problems and fell into alcoholism and morphine addiction. Her pain reached a breaking point on New Year's Eve in 1925. After finishing a 6-week engagement at Chicago's Moulin Rouge, Evelyn attempted to take her own life by drinking disinfectant. As a result, headlines across the country once again turned her tragic life into front-page news. Doctors later said her life was saved only because her stomach was full of gin. Even years after their divorce, Evelyn's relationship with Harry Kendall Thaw fascinated the public. Following her attempt to take her own life, rumors swirled about a possible reconciliation. A newspaper headline from January 1926 read, "Thaw to visit Chicago, reconciliation rumor." When interviewed, Thaw claimed he had been sending Evelyn $10 a day through his attorney as a token of their pleasant memories of the past. By June 1926, the former couple was even photographed together, sparking more speculation. Thaw attended the opening of Chez Evelyn in Manhattan in 1927, and in 1929, rumors spread that they might remarry. Some reports even suggested that Thaw had bought Evelyn a bungalow in Atlantic City. However, their lives ultimately remained separate. When Thaw died in 1947, he left Evelyn $10,000 from his million-dollar estate. Evelyn continued to perform during the 1930s, working in Panama and even adding burlesque to her repertoire. At the age of 55, she shared a stage with strippers and told a reporter, I wish I were a stripteaser. I wouldn't have to bother with so many clothes. Evelyn's name occasionally appeared in the news for unrelated events. In 1945, she was questioned about the murder of Albert Langford, the husband of her friend Marion Langford. Evelyn had a strong alibi and was never suspected, but her association with the case gave newspapers an excuse to bring her name back into the spotlight. The murder remains unsolved to this day. In 1947, following Thaw's death, Evelyn moved to California to be near her son Russell, who lived in West Los Angeles. She settled in downtown Los Angeles and pursued her passion for art. She studied sculpting and ceramics at the Grant Beach School of Arts and Crafts, graduating in 1952. Evelyn even taught art classes, finding a sense of purpose away from the stage. Final years and a story retold. In the summer of 1955, Evelyn worked as a technical advisor for the movie The Girl in the Red Velvet Swing. The film dramatized her early life and the murder of Stanford White. Evelyn was paid $10,000 for her role in the production, but collapsed from exhaustion during filming. She suffered a stroke the following year in 1956, marking the beginning of her decline. Evelyn wrote 2 memoirs about her life: The Story of My Life in 1914 and Prodigal Days in 1934. These books captured her reflections on a life filled with beauty, scandal, and resilience. Evelyn Nesbit passed away on January 17, 1967, at the age of 82. She spent her final years in a nursing home in Santa Monica, California, where she had lived for over a year. She was laid to rest at Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City, California. Evelyn Nesbit's life was a mix of beauty, scandal, and tragedy that still fascinates people today. From her rise to fame to the shocking events that followed, her story is one of survival and resilience. What do you think about Evelyn's life and the choices she made? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that uncover the secrets of history's most captivating figures. Thanks for watching.